Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us again. We're going to be speaking with Nancy Dedea. She's joining us to talk about her 15 years as a D&I officer, a little bit of her personal history, and how she nurtured the development of the DI programs at a pharmaceutical industry giant. She's also going to share a little bit of what she's learned on how to build sustainable change over time. A lot to talk about in a short period of time. Welcome, Nancy Dedea. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Neil. Great to be here.
Well, I understand that you have a very interesting background. I said that you're joining us here from Boehringer Ingelheim. Give us a little bit of your personal history. Talk about a little bit about how it shaped your professional life and a little bit about your role there at BNI.
Yeah, so I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised. Grew up in Brooklyn, New York in the late 60s, early 70s. And New York was going through a lot of change at that time. Civil rights were at play. There was a lot of civil unrest, very similar to what we're feeling and experiencing today, almost, 40, 50 years later. And being a product of the New York City public school systems, I saw a lot of segregation as much as I saw integration. I was always the kind of kid who noticed the outliers, the ones who were different. And when I say different, that didn't look like me or that sat alone on the bench. So for me, it was something. I was very athletic as well. It was something about always helping the minority. And I didn't know what that meant then, but I just had a soft place for kids that weren't in the core or the center. So that led me to working going to school, ultimately working in a large major financial institution, and going through corporate America in the 90s. It was really high pressure, very corporate, and very much requiring people to fit into a mold of who they weren't, but to really be corporate. So there was a look, there was a feel, there was a style. And that was really very unnatural for me. And as much as I tried to fit into that, we're going back to the days where women couldn't even wear pantsuits, right? And that was just unheard of in terms of inclusion, letting people show up authentically. And then having a series of managers, good, bad, and ugly, some that I think were terrific and some that weren't so terrific in terms of how they treated women, how they treated underrepresented groups, were all triggers for me to really want to make a difference and change things a little bit more. And so ultimately, I would say during this time, there were a few things going on. One, I personally was in the closet as a gay female and didn't feel comfortable coming out. And at the same time, maybe 5 years after, that period where I wanted to publicly come out, I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I went through traumatic change in my life, and it really helped me to focus on what matters. And to me, what matters was equity and people feeling that they had a fair shot and that things were, especially in healthcare. And, especially being a female, having breast cancer, and being gay, there really weren't outlets for me to gain support. So long story short, after several mergers in the financial institution I was in, many jobs were eliminated. I opted out of staying in the new organization, started my own consulting firm, and then Boehringer Ingelheim became a client of mine. And I worked at Boehringer Ingelheim as a consultant for 2 years. And I really found my purpose in healthcare. And what I mean by that is I was really driven and motivated to help others, to help patients, to help our employees feel more empowered and to remind them of their why and why we're all here. So doing this kind of work not only helped me to find my way, but it also helped me to create a culture of inclusion, belonging, equity, and it's something, as you said in your opening remarks, it's not one and done and you walk away from it. This is continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. As the world changes, as situations occur, we have to constantly work at this. And as people's priorities change and expectations change, we have to adapt to that changing world as well.
You've got a high-level position there at BNI, Executive Director, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and Head U.S. DICE. What programs at BNI are you most proud of, and why?
Well, there are actually three programs or strategies that I would say that come to mind. In the past year especially, one of them is a series of courageous conversations that we instituted after the George Floyd killing. And that was an opportunity for myself and a senior leader to co-lead very safe discussions for people to just express how they were feeling. When you think about it, it was truly what I call the trifecta of uncertainty last year. We had the pandemic, we had the social injustices occurring, and election uncertainty, among other things. And we've run over 30 of these with more than 30% of our employees, almost 3,000 of our employees participating in them. And this was a safe space for people to talk about what was on their mind, to express their emotions in a space where they weren't being judged. And what was most fascinating about that was to see how other employees reached out to each other during these virtual calls. Now, mind you, none of us were in the office, but to watch this type of outreach happen in chat, for people to raise their hands virtually to acknowledge that support. So one, that told me we were doing the right thing and we were hitting a need that was so crucial. In addition to that, we introduced the notion of being an upstander, and this is more than just a moment, but really a movement. And what that really aligns to is, if you see something, say something, stand with your colleague, especially if you see something that's inequitable or a comment that could be demeaning unintentionally, but stand up for that and be an ally, stand with them. So we introduced that, and we have a couple of other hashtags that really speak to inclusion. One of them is the hashtag for each other. And I think that really leveled the playing field, that we were all in the same storm, but different boats, right? Dealing with a lot of different challenges behind the scenes, behind the camera, knowing, hearing pets barking, right, hearing doorbells ring. There was a lot more acceptance of new ways of working. So having people really show up that way was one other piece that I was proud of. The second was the expansion and nationalization of our business resource groups. And we have 12 of them. They have just been so powerful. We've done actually some historical educational sessions on Juneteenth. This year, we celebrated Juneteenth as a holiday before it even became federally approved as a holiday. So last year, we instituted Juneteenth as a holiday. And then I would say the third was really around the pandemic, which was a workshop that I had the privilege of presenting to our board of managing directors on navigating through uncertainty and ambiguity. And that was so well received by our board members. We were given the green light to roll this out globally. And it rolled out in Europe, and mostly Europe, Eastern and Western Europe. So more than 6,000 of our colleagues worldwide got to understand their emotions about the pandemic and new ways of working. So those are three things in the past year that we did in this unstable year, but there's so much more, Neil, that I'm proud of.
What is your advice to young folks that are entering the healthcare workforce today, and a little bit of advice on sustaining this change that's been implemented over the long haul?
Yeah. So my advice to people entering the healthcare workforce right now is patience and persistence, right? I know sometimes the two of those collide, but one, we need to be patient because there's an incredible amount of inequities that occur, especially in the multicultural patient populations. And we need to really iron those out to ensure that every patient has access to medicines, affordable medicines in general. The other piece is it's a highly rewarding career to be in healthcare. To hear patients talk about the commitment of organizations like ours or industry that's really concerned about patient well-being, and knowing that you're making a difference in the quality of somebody's life is really another important purpose-driven angle in this industry. And, I know this sounds kind of corny, but never stop trying, never stop giving up, because I have had numerous experiences where I stopped trying and just felt that I exhausted all possibilities. And then a couple of weeks later, I came back with a slightly different angle, and my idea was accepted. So I think always be patient with yourself, be patient with the systems industry, and work collaboratively with your clinical teams, your marketing teams, your sales teams to make a difference, because everyone that's here is here for that purpose. I've never met a more purpose-driven organization, from leadership all the way across the board to every employee that contributes to the well-being of our patients and animals.
Nancy, it has been a pleasure speaking with you this morning. I thank you for joining us here on Health Professional Radio.
Thank you, Neil. It's been my distinct pleasure to be with you this morning.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Nancy DeDia, Executive Director, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and Head U.S. DICE at Boehringer Ingelheim. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.